All right, welcome back. Now, not too long ago, the National Police Service announced that it would soon ban cross-rank marriages in a controversial move to address the cases of violence amongst officers in romantic relationships. Well, tonight, our conversation seeks to look at relationships in the workplace and how they are regulated. On the panel, we have Wikali Mudiani, Director and Lead Consultant at Millennial HR, and Dr. Kirindi Odindo, a Consultant, Clinical and Health and Positive Psychologist. Thank you both for joining me this evening. I'd actually tweeted this a bit earlier on Twitter, and a man responded saying, "I met my wife at my workplace. She was a student then. She later graduated. We now work together, but not in the same place we met. Given a chance, I would do it again." So this is becoming quite common. And Wikali, let me begin with you because, you've worked in various organizations in the HR department, and I'm sure you have been met with many of these kinds of cases where colleagues find love at the office. So how do you kind of manage this dynamic of people meeting and finding love?
Thank you, Veronica. Good evening, viewers. Yes, I've met situations like this in offices, and I think it will happen and continue to happen because we must look at certain cases like where do people meet, where do people spend their time. So you find most people will spend their time in the offices from 8 to 5 days a week. So they are bound to meet people that they may like. Again, statistics sometimes show us that people either meet in churches, either in the places of work, or in social gatherings. And so the bigger the organizations, the more it will attract a lot of people who are likely to mingle and like each other. And so they will be there. I think the most important thing is for them to be able to navigate that space very carefully so that it doesn't affect their careers. And as the person who said they met their wife at their place of work, I don't know the reason why they're working in a different organization right now, but it could be the same challenges we are facing here. Like, could they continue to work together or do they have to leave so that they can grow? Because sometimes you can make career limiting moves when you stay together and you're expecting both of you to grow within the organization. So yes, people will fall in love in the offices and they'll have to decide whether to marry or not. And of course, there will be regulations within the organization that they might want to observe. But let me also say that, Victoria, matters of the heart are very personal. So nobody can dictate whom you can like at the place of work. And nobody can tell you, don't marry this person. So we also have to respect that. But employers are also concerned about productivity, and they would want to have employees not have things that really cause them to fail, like to derail them from the main goal. Every time I've looked at an employment contract, I always see contracts about goals that are about work and performing your duties. I've never seen a goal about being romantically involved with someone. So people have to be very careful also about what really took them to that place of work and guard that as much as they also feel like they're free to mingle and mix up.
Wikali, you just mentioned how no one can tell you or put a policy in place saying that you can't marry a colleague. But, to be honest, we know in many organizations there are silent non-fraternization clauses. What happens in those scenarios where it's not said explicitly, but it's understood that this can't happen?
I think that the policies are there in quite a number of organizations and to the places where I've worked as well. But they are there to safeguard employees as well as to safeguard the organization. And so there will be places where people can get married and still remain within the organization, but it will not be possible for them to be, for instance, in one department. It is not possible for them to be a boss and subordinate relationship because then there'll be a conflict. And so you will find most regulations just stipulate what should not happen. They don't say don't fall in love. Some will not say don't get married, but some will say if you get married, then this is likely to happen. You might get a transfer if it is a large organization to a different place. You might get moved from, if you are in a relationship, like if you are in a same department, you might be moved to another department. But if there is no place where you can be moved to and the organization feels like there would be a threat into performance of both of you, then one of you may be asked to leave. In fact, some organizations say you would be asked to resign as a last resort. And that is if truly it's not possible for you to work there. Imagine if it's a very small organization. And sometimes we all know sometimes there are challenges at home. You come to work, those challenges continue to be there. Of course, other people also come with similar challenges, but our ways of coping with such situations are different. So some will cope well, others might bring their problems to the office and then make everybody else sort of start having a toxic culture of people navigating this relationship of colleagues because they are privy to what is going on.
And let me
so the regulations have to be there.
Let me bring Dr. Kirindi in on that, because if the relationship does happen, we've just talked about it, you can't control people. These are human beings who have a right to associate, right to marry and love who they want to. But if that happens, how does one then manage the boundaries between personal and professional? Because as Mwikali just said, you don't want personal drama coming into the office and literally discombobulating everything in terms of the work culture. So what happens? How do they manage professional and personal?
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. Good evening to all the viewers. It's very murky, and I think we need to kind of maybe disaggregate the groups a little bit, because there's some of us who are, in our 50s now, and we grew up in a very conservative culture where there were very clear lines about do's, about don'ts, the kind of value-based spaces that we existed in and of themselves gave us boundaries. But what do we do within the millennial culture, within the growing Generation Z culture, where social media comes in? So when we're talking about boundaries, how do those boundaries really get delineated? And we know this from workplaces and from what's come out of a lot of the microaggressions and, like Mwikali says, the toxic cultures that can sometimes come in today's world because of tech and because of that social media presence that people exist in, and that is their world. So when we talk boundaries, what is the reach and how far is the reach that you can determine the boundaries? And this then calls for us to look at more personal ways that people police themselves, quote unquote, when they decide, and this can be done in different ways. I think more progressive organizations really bring their employees into the space to have their voice, have them represented, have their views and their own sort of social space guarded by themselves in terms of the do's and don'ts. What are the guiding principles if we do choose to have a relationship? And think about it, Victoria. What is relationship today? We're working within a COVID space. The workspace has shifted. How we see our world has shifted. The stresses within which we exist shift. So the boundaries and what we call boundaries shift as well. I mean, these are all part of contextual spaces, and they are determined by who we are. So it is a bit difficult because it is about self-regulation, isn't it? It's about, it begins with you, because this high hand of HR or seen to be HR then shifts the culture of an organization completely. And then who do we have sitting on that seat? Someone who's operating out of fear, or do you want someone to operate out of their own volition and potential and working towards their purpose, as opposed to really running away from what it is they see as punitive spaces?
Right.
So, it's really got to be a question of what works, what doesn't, what kind of roles are we in. I've supported organizations like schools. Schools encourage couples to be there, particularly schools with boarding section. They like that couple space. That's part of what they believe brings grounding and allows children to grow. And for international schools, for example, it's also a cost-effective way to bring a family that exist within a system. And so there is a bit of that exchange. But where it might, particularly with uniformed forces or places that are far more rigid, I would say, for lack of a better word, in the way they must perform their tasks and where ethics and standards come in, then you want to see, what are we saying boundaries are? But I think the guidelines generally do come from your codes of conduct, your audits, your oversight spaces. Some places have councils that the councils themselves sit in and determine together with your C-suite, your leadership, what should go on.
I need to bring Wikali in on this because, we saw that recent announcement by NPS that wants to ban cross-rank marriages. So they were very specific in terms of who you can't interact with. And when it comes to an office setting, corporate setting, who you link up with, who you build a connection with matters too. So for instance, if you're going to connect with a boss, that brings a whole nother set of dynamics. And so from an HR perspective, how is that managed? And, how would you recommend individuals to kind of look for partners, especially if someone is a junior or someone is your boss?
I think first, since people will meet and like each other, if they get into a relationship at the workplace, they must set boundaries, as Kirindi has said. And such boundaries, first, let me say, actually, not all relationships at work are bad, Some actually create very good synergy for work and end up actually enhancing productivity of the employees involved. So it's important to note that. But then when not well managed, it can get out of hand. For instance, is it something is your friendship continuing, your relationship continue to be evident in the office to an extent where you're not able to perform your duties, to an extent where you are a nuisance to other people because you're always lovey-dovey there, running around, looking out at each other and smiling and making everybody else maybe feel worship for themselves. I don't know. But I'm just saying it's important for the people in love just to also guard that and protect their space of work, because that is their space of work. And so they have to put those boundaries. The personal life remains personal, and then the office life, work life remains work life, office work life. And then this is important because if they get to a place where they're very sure, we know where this needs to go. That is to the next step, which may lead to marriage. Either they check what their policy says about it, or they just approach their line managers and talk about it. So when you are sure it is something you need to take further, then you can't keep quiet about it, because then there's lack of integrity on you. It's important to declare that as a conflict if your policy says that we do not encourage our relationships. It doesn't mean that you'll be asked to leave, but it means then a solution will be sought for separating you if you are too close together, and whatever else that the organization perhaps has put in place. Right now, we talk about remote working. Maybe one of you could be said to be the one who works from home, or both of you alternate. If you get married, that you're not in the office at the same time. So there should be solutions, but the first thing is just stating this is who we are and making it clear that this is not part of gossip. Because if you don't do that, then it gives room for people to speculate, and to just lose focus on what is important. And for an employer, what is important is really productivity. Right. And just as Keridio said, I also know organizations like in the NGO world who encourage couples to work together. So it's not actually everyone who is against. It depends with what you are doing, really. Is there conflict? Is there a way you can be favored? Is there a way others can see you being treated differently, So those are the things I would talk about, Victoria.
And, we're running out of time, but just before we wrap up, Dr. Kirindi, I saw a lot of concern when, it was announced by the police service to ban the cross-rank marriages and whatnot, and people wondering, will this really deal with the SGBV cases that have been reported within police marriages? I know they have a similar policy in KDF as well. And then some people pointing out that there could be systemic issues causing a lot of this tension and strife in these police marriages, if you will, and not necessarily that it's two police officers in a marriage. What are your thoughts on that?
I guess they're between a rock and a hard place. If I really think about it, they're darned if they do it, darned if they don't. They have to find a way to fix the amount of gun violence that is seen, that is within that intimate partner spaces. But we do know for certain that this has much more to do with other sociopathic or psychological issues that do come into the space. So are we putting a policy in place as we address the root causes? Or are we just placing a Band-Aid and imagining that that Band-Aid is going to really go and deal with what's up? Because one thing is, in our forces here, of course, we don't do the kind of psychological testing that they do in other countries. We don't have as much of those facilities. So it's a little more reactionary. It's a little more based on, yes, we do know there's a lot of trauma that comes in, but there's also the question of what leads you to join the forces. And this is what you're seeing in very many other military places. So some have tried to professionalize it. I mean, I do a lot of my military and uniformed forces work in West Africa. And so you see a bit of a disparity there, but that's also because that region has gone through a lot of strife over the years, a lot of conflict. So in trying to address some of these underlying issues, they have instituted in place gender officers. They're working with psychologists, which I'm glad we're doing as well. But again, it'll never be enough to come down to the recruitment space, because it is the recruitment space where you start identifying at-risk, looking at hidden performance, understanding the spaces we come from, who is more predisposed based on the kind of duties that they're exposed to. And what does that mean? Because whether it's cross-rank, inter-rank, between the ranks, it really doesn't matter. We still bring our person, our heart and mind and souls into the space. And that's where the issue is. And there are very many people who have all manner of backgrounds that bring them to the kind of actions that they, find themselves in, unfortunately. So criminalizing, putting that very hard case superficial space might not be the answer.
All right. Thank you so much, Wikali, Dr. Kirindi, for your insights. And, of course, as this continues, this conversation on what MPS seeks to do to deal with strife and violence in police marriages, it just brings up a larger conversation about relationships at work, which at the end of the day, we are hired to do a job, not necessarily find love, but I guess it's a bonus if you do. But thank you for coming on tonight. Let's take a short break here on Citizen Weekend. Sports news is coming up next. Stay with us.